"No one wants a girl like me," the Apache girl whispered, her heart heavy with rejection until the rancher's smile lit a promise she'd never known. But is his vow of love strong enough to withstand the world determined to keep them apart? The sun bled red across the horizon as the day began to die over Dust Creek Valley, a lonely stretch of land where the prairie wind whispered through brittle grass. The world was quiet, save for the steady rhythm of hooves, Elias McKenna's bay gelding carrying him home after a day of mending fences. Elias was a man of 35, carved from solitude and silence, his ranch tucked against the shadow of the foothills. It was not a place for visitors. Dust Creek rarely welcomed strangers, and Elias, with his weathered face and wary eyes, had grown accustomed to the company of cattle more than people. But fate often found its way into places least prepared to receive it. That evening, as he rode into his yard, Elias noticed the barn door unlatched. His jaw tightened. Rustlers had been known to drift this way. Dismounting, he pushed the door wide, hand near his holster. There, curled up in the hayloft, like some wild creature, was a girl. She could not have been more than 20, her long black hair spilling over her shoulders, her dress torn at the hem. Dirt streaked her cheeks, but her eyes, when they fluttered open, were sharp and wary, like a doe cornered in the brush. Elias froze. So did she. "I'll go," she whispered, voice trembling but stubborn. "Don't shoot. I'll go." Her accent carried the cadence of the Apache. Dust Creek had never been kind to her people. The prejudice hung thick as dust in the air. Elias studied her, every instinct telling him to send her away. Yet something in her voice, fragile but unbroken, pulled against his resolve. She was hungry, exhausted, alone. "You got a name?" he asked at last, his voice rough from disuse. She hesitated. "Nayeli," she said. "It means I am loved." Her lips twisted as if the meaning were a cruel jest. "But no one wants a girl like me." The words struck him harder than he expected, slicing through years of silence he had built around his heart. Elias wasn't a man who invited trouble, but he knew what abandonment looked like. He had lived it after the war, after loss, after too many cold nights with only the wind for company. "You can stay tonight," he said finally, surprising himself. "The barn's warm, safer than the open road." Her eyes widened, suspicion battling with relief. "Why?" Elias didn't answer right away. He only set down a lantern near the hay and turned toward the door. His reasons were still tangled in his chest. Maybe it was a pity. Maybe it was the quiet bravery in her voice. Or maybe it was that in this wide, empty land, both of them were lonelier than they dared admit. As he stepped outside, the evening wind carried her soft whisper, almost lost in the dark. "Thank you." And though Elias told himself he was only offering shelter, he felt the stir of something he hadn't known in years' hope. If you've ever seen a life change in a moment, wait until you hear what Nayeli says next. Morning broke over Dust Creek with a pale gold light, spilling across the barnyard, where Elias moved through the motions of ranch life. He tossed feed to the chickens, checked the troughs, and mended a loose gate hinge, all the while aware of the presence in his barn. Nayeli had not fled in the night. When Elias entered, he found her crouched near the hayloft ladder, her knees drawn up, watching him like she was waiting for a verdict. Her dark hair was tangled, and her clothes still bore the wear of miles traveled. But her eyes bright, uncertain, followed his every step. "You're still here," Elias said. "I thought you might run me off at sunrise," she answered. "Would've if I wanted to," he said simply. He set down a small tin cup of water and a heel of bread from the kitchen. She took them without a word, eating carefully, as though not sure if more would come. For a time, silence stretched between them, filled only by the rustle of hay and the shuffle of hooves. Then, softly, Nayeli began to hum. It wasn't a song Elias knew, but it was steady and low, carrying a rhythm that seemed to soothe the horses. Even the restless colt stilled, ears flicking toward her. Elias leaned against a post, uneasy. He had not heard music in his barn for years, not since before the war, not since his mother's voice had faded from memory. He found himself listening longer than he meant to, caught in the quiet power of it. "You sing when you're afraid?" he asked finally. Nayeli's shoulders lifted. "When I'm alone, when I want to forget." Her words stirred questions Elias didn't press. He wasn't a man to pry, and she wasn't ready to tell. Still, her humming lingered in the air even after she fell silent. Later, Nayeli insisted on helping. She carried buckets half her size, scattered feed for the hens, and even brushed down Elias's gelding with careful strokes. He told her she didn't need to, but she lifted her chin stubbornly. "If I stay, I must work," she said. "Else it is charity, and I want no charity." Her determination surprised him. Many would have begged for food, pleaded for shelter. Nayeli demanded her place be earned, and Elias found he respected that more than he expected. By noon, he caught himself watching her from the corner of his eye. She moved like someone who had spent her life on the edges of belonging, cautious, alert, but yearning for steadiness. Still, her presence unsettled him. Dust Creek wasn't kind to outsiders, and an Apache girl on his ranch would stir questions he wasn't ready to answer. Yet each time he thought of telling her to go, he remembered the way her voice had softened the barn, how it had quieted something restless in him. That night, as Elias sat on the porch watching the stars gather, he heard it again, her humming drifting through the barn walls, fragile yet unbroken. And for the first time in years, the silence of his ranch did not feel like a burden. The days that followed slipped into a fragile rhythm. Elias rose with the dawn, as always, but now he found Nayeli already awake, waiting near the barn door as though afraid she might be turned out. He didn't say much, but he didn't send her away either. Each morning, she claimed a task for herself. She fetched eggs from the henhouse, carried water from the pump, and followed him out to the pasture where the cattle grazed. She moved with caution at first, uncertain, but her persistence wore down Elias's resistance. Soon, he no longer argued when she reached for a tool or took a bundle of feed from his hands. The ranch, long silent, began to carry small notes of life again. The chickens clucked louder under Nayeli's care. The horses stood calmer when she brushed them, and even the air seemed less heavy. Elias had lived in a world muted by his own grief, but now there was a flicker of sound where there had been none. At times, Nayeli sang as she worked. Not loud, never bold, but soft and steady, like water over stones. Elias would pause, listening without meaning to, and feel something in his chest shift. He told himself it was just a memory, stirring nothing more. One evening, as the sun dropped low and painted the sky in streaks of crimson, Nayeli lingered outside the barn, watching Elias repair a broken wagon wheel. Her fingers toyed with the hem of her sleeve, and finally she asked, "Why are you alone out here?" Elias kept his eyes on the wheel. "This land was my father's. When he passed, I stayed. Haven't had a reason to leave." "That's not what I asked," she said softly. He glanced at her then, surprised by the boldness in her tone. Her eyes were steady, too knowing for someone so young. Elias tightened the bolt and set the wrench aside. "Sometimes," he said slowly, "folks stay alone because it's easier than losing again." The words hung heavy in the air. Nayeli lowered her gaze but nodded as if she understood more than he intended to share. That night, as Elias sat on the porch with his coffee, he heard her singing again from the barn. The melody drifted out over the fields, gentle yet filled with something he couldn't name. He leaned back, listening, until the stars burned bright above. For the first time in years, Elias realized the ranch didn't feel quite so empty. But with that realization came unease. Dust Creek was small, and secrets rarely stayed hidden. If neighbors saw the girl, if word spread, trouble would follow. Elias told himself he needed to decide soon, send her away, or risk the storm she might bring. Yet, When he imagined the barn without her voice, the silence seemed unbearable. And so, though he gave no promise and spoke no word, Elias made his choice in silence. Nayeli would stay, for now. Autumn crept slowly into Dust Creek, its winds carrying a sharper edge. Elias rose earlier with the chill and found Nayeli already at work, sweeping the barn aisle with determination. She had claimed the space as her own, though she never said so outright. That morning, as he hauled a bale of hay, he caught her humming again. The melody floated through the rafters, simple yet haunting, and for a moment, Elias froze. He knew that song. The notes curled through his memory like smoke from a fire long buried. It had been years since he last heard it sung in a soft, lilting voice that belonged to his mother. She used to hum while sewing by lamplight, a tune so private it had never left the family. Elias had nearly forgotten it until Nayeli's voice stitched the memory back together. "Where'd you learn that?" His voice came out rougher than he intended. Nayeli looked startled. "What do you mean?" "The tune," he pressed. "You were humming it just now." Her brow furrowed. "I don't remember when I first knew it. My mother would sing it when I was little. She said it was to keep away fear." Elias stared, the air in his chest thinning. That was exactly what his mother had told him as a boy. He stepped back, unsettled, as if the barn walls had shifted. Nayeli tilted her head, uncertain. "Did I do something wrong?" "No," he muttered, setting the bale down harder than needed. "Just strange is all." But the strangeness stayed with him all day. As he rode the fence line, the melody circled in his mind, awakening pieces of a past he thought he'd buried beneath work and solitude. By evening, the weight of it was almost unbearable. After supper, he sat at the table with a scrap of paper and a blunt pencil. The tune had no words, but the pattern of notes was etched deep into his memory. His hand moved slowly, sketching the lines. He slid the paper across the table to Nayeli, who had lingered nearby as though waiting for company. Her eyes widened as she studied it. "You know this?" "It was my mother's," Elias said quietly. Nayeli's lips parted, shock softening her face. "Then, how?" "My mother, she taught it to me, as though it belonged to our people. She said it was old, older than I could know." Elias pushed back his chair abruptly, the scrape loud in the silence. He couldn't explain, not when the ground beneath his feet felt unsteady. Without another word, he left the table and stepped out into the night, where the stars burned cold above him. Behind him, Nayeli sat with the paper clutched in her hands, staring at the tune that tied them together in ways neither understood. For the first time, Elias wondered if her arrival on his ranch was no accident at all. The night settled heavy over Dust Creek, moonlight spilling pale across the ranch. Elias had long since turned in, though sleep came only in restless fragments. His mind churned with the memory of the song, with Nayeli's voice carrying echoes he couldn't explain. Then it came a sharp cry, splitting the stillness. Elias bolted upright. For a moment, he thought it was a coyote howling in the distance, but the sound carried fear too raw, too human. He threw on his boots and crossed the yard in seconds, a lantern swinging in his grip. The barn door creaked open to reveal Nayeli thrashing in her bed of blankets, face damp with sweat. Her lips moved in broken fragments of words, pleas, cries in both English and Apache. Elias set the lantern down and knelt beside her, his rough hands hovering, unsure if touch would comfort or startle. "Nayeli," he called, voice low but firm. Her eyes snapped open, wide with terror. She gasped, chest heaving, and for a heartbeat Elias thought she might bolt like a wild thing. Instead, she broke sobbing, curling into herself. "I can't go back," she whispered, shaking. "Don't let them take me back." Something in Elias cracked. 7 years of silence, of keeping his words locked behind clenched teeth, collapsed under the weight of her plea. "It's okay," he said. The words felt foreign on his tongue, hoarse and jagged, but they were real. Nayeli stilled, blinking up at him in astonishment. You spoke, she whispered. Elias's throat tightened. He hadn't spoken more than a handful of words since the war had ended, since the day he buried too much of himself with the dead. Yet here he was, speaking again for her. Nayeli's tears slowed, though her trembling did not. You mean it? Am I safe here? He nodded, forcing the words out again, softer, but steady. You're safe. The barn fell quiet, but for the rhythmic breath of the horses, Nayeli stared at him, as if seeing him anew, and Elias found himself unable to look away. The fragile line between them shifted, no longer rancher and runaway, but two souls carrying shadows heavier than they should. By dawn, Elias hadn't returned to bed. He sat outside the barn, back against the wall, listening for her breathing inside. The prairie stretched before him, endless and indifferent, but for once, he didn't feel so small against it. When Nayeli emerged at sunrise, her face was pale but calmer. She glanced at him, hesitating. Thank you, she murmured. Elias cleared his throat, unused to shaping words after years of silence. It came rough but certain. You're welcome. The sound startled even him. Nayeli smiled faintly, the first he had seen from her. It was small, uncertain, but it lit the morning brighter than the rising Sunday. And Elias realized that with 3 simple words, the world he had kept locked for years had cracked open, and there was no shutting it again. The air carried warning long before the sky split. All afternoon, the wind shifted restless across Dust Creek, stirring dust into the air and driving the cattle uneasy. Elias worked fast, tightening gates and herding stragglers into the main corral. By sundown, the clouds had swollen, dark and heavy, pressing low over the valley like a clenched fist. Nayeli helped where she could, though fear shadowed her face. She flinched at each crack of distant thunder, her hands tightening on the fence rail. Elias noticed, but said nothing. He remembered enough about fear to know words alone could not quiet it. When the storm broke, it came hard. Rain slashed across the land, turning dirt to muck in minutes. Lightning carved jagged white scars across the sky. Elias rushed to the barn to check the animals, only to find Nayeli crouched in the corner, her arms wrapped around her knees, eyes wide. She didn't notice him at first, her body shaking with each thunderclap. Nayeli, Elias said, his voice steady though his heart raced with the storm. She looked up, her face pale. It's the same, she whispered. The same night they came when the storm raged. Took everything. I can't. Her breath hitched, the rest lost to panic. Elias crouched beside her, his large frame a shelter from the flashes of light. He didn't touch her, not yet, but his presence filled the space like a wall between her and the storm. You're not there, he told her, words breaking free easier than before. You're here, with me. Her breathing came ragged, but she clung to his voice. Thunder rolled again, louder, and she flinched hard. Then, almost desperate, she began to sing. The notes trembled, uneven, but the melody carried the same strength as before, a song to keep away fear. Elias felt it rise through him, that same tune his mother once sang. Something inside demanded he join. His throat burned, dry with years of silence, but he forced the words rough, cracked, but there. Together, their voices wove through the thunder, hers soft, his broken, but in the harmony was defiance. The storm still raged, yet inside the barn it seemed less powerful, its fury muffled beneath the sound of 2 voices refusing to be drowned. When the worst passed, rain easing to a steady patter, Nayeli leaned against the wall, exhausted, but calmer. She glanced at Elias, disbelief flickering in her eyes. You sang, she whispered. So did you, he answered. His chest ached, not from the storm, but from the weight that had shifted within him. Speaking had been hard enough. Singing felt like opening a wound and finding it healed instead of bleeding. For a long moment they sat in the dim lantern light, the storm's tail fading beyond the hills. Two souls stitched together by a song older than either of them fully understood. When silence finally returned, it no longer felt like emptiness. It felt like peace. The storm left Dust Creek washed clean, the earth damp and dark beneath a sky too bright for comfort. Elias spent the morning checking the fence line, while Nayeli gathered fallen branches near the barn. There was a quiet steadiness between them now, born from the night before. Neither spoke of the song they had shared, but both carried its echo in their hearts. By afternoon, the silence of the valley was broken by the sound of hooves. A rider approached from the east, his silhouette tall in the saddle. Elias tensed, hand brushing the revolver at his hip. Strangers seldom came this far uninvited. The man drew closer, reining in a lean sorrel gelding. He was wiry, with a preacher's hat shading sharp eyes and a smile that didn't reach them. His coat bore dust from long travel, and his voice, when he spoke, slid smooth as oil. "Afternoon, friend," he called. "Name's Reverend Cole. I'm looking for someone." Elias didn't move from where he stood, boots planted firm. "Plenty of folks pass through," he said. "Ain't my concern." Cole's smile widened. "This one's special. Young woman, dark hair, Apache features. She ran from her rightful guardians. I imagine she's scared, confused. It's my duty to bring her back where she belongs." Inside the barn, Nayeli froze. She had been carrying a bucket of water, but now she crouched low, pressing herself into the shadows. Her chest heaved as Cole's words spilled like poison into the open air. Elias's jaw tightened. He knew lies when he heard them. Something in the man's voice dripped with possession rather than care. "Don't know anyone like that," Elias said flatly. Cole tilted his head, studying him with a predator's patience. "You're alone out here, aren't you? A hard life for one man. The company would be noticed." "I said I don't know her." Elias's voice carried steel now. The Reverend chuckled, but there was no humor in it. "I'll not press today. But if you see her, if some stray girl crosses your path, you send word. It'll go better for her if she returns willingly." He tipped his hat and turned his gelding toward the road, but his parting words carried a weight that lingered. "I'll be back, Mr. McKenna. Sooner than you think." Dust rose behind him as he rode away. Only when the rider disappeared over the ridge did Nayeli step out, her face pale, eyes wide with fear. "That was him," she whispered. "One of them. He'll never stop." Elias met her gaze, steady and unflinching. "Then neither will I." It was the first promise he had made in years, and though it came with risk, Elias knew he meant every word. The quiet of Dust Creek had been broken, and in its place stood a truth he could no longer ignore. The world wanted to take Nayeli back, but he would not let it. That evening, Elias lit a fire in the hearth, the flames crackling bright against the early chill of autumn. He hadn't invited company into his home in years, but tonight he opened the door and gestured for Nayeli to step inside. She did so cautiously, as though uncertain if she belonged in a house built on solitude. She sat near the fire, her knees drawn up, while Elias busied himself with the kettle. He wasn't much for conversation, but the weight of Reverend Cole's visit still hung heavy between them. Neither could ignore it. At last, Nayeli spoke, her voice low but steady. "You should know the truth about me." Elias glanced at her. Her face glowed in the firelight, but shadows clung to her eyes. "I was raised in a house not of my choosing," she continued. "They called it a family, but it was more like a cage. My mother, she tried to shield me. She taught me songs, said they were prayers to keep fear away." Her voice faltered, and she looked into the flames, as though the story lived there. "When she died, they told me I had no choice, that I belonged to them, that my blood, my name, meant I would never be wanted anywhere else. I believed it for a long time." Elias leaned forward, elbows on his knees. So you ran? She nodded. I ran when the storm came, thinking maybe the thunder could hide me. I didn't know where I was going, only that anywhere else was better than there. Her hand touched her chest, just over her heart. The song, it's all I carried with me, a way to remind myself I was still alive. Elias studied her, the firelight catching the strength behind her weariness. He had known loneliness, but not like hers. His silence had been chosen, born of grief. Hers had been forced, a life pressed into the shape others demanded. You're not theirs anymore, he said quietly. The words surprised even him, firm as a vow. Nayeli turned to him, her eyes bright with something unspoken, gratitude, fear, maybe hope. Why are you helping me? Elias's gaze held hers, steady despite the storm stirring inside him. Because I know what it means to lose everything, and I know what it means to want one chance to start again. The fire crackled between them, filling the silence. Then, without prompting, Nayeli began to sing soft at first, then stronger, the melody winding through the cabin like a thread stitching broken things together. Elias listened, and for the first time, he let himself answer, speaking not singing, but steady words that met her music head-on. He told her about the war, about burying his father, about the years of silence he thought would never end. By the time the fire burned low, neither felt quite so alone. The ranch was no longer just his, it was theirs. 2 days after the firelit confession, Elias sensed trouble before it arrived. The prairie carried sound far, and by mid-morning he caught the clatter of hooves on the ridge. This wasn't a lone rider. It was more. Nayeli was hauling water from the pump when she froze, hearing it too. Fear flickered across her face. Elias's jaw hardened. He stepped onto the porch, rifle in hand, and waited. 3 riders crested the ridge, Reverend Cole, at their head, flanked by 2 men in deputy badges. Dust rose in their wake as they drew into the yard. Cole dismounted with practiced ease, his smile too sharp to be kind. "Mr. McKenna," he drawled, "it seems our paths cross again. I told you I'd return." The deputies swung down beside him. One carried an official-looking document, though the other kept his hand near his gun. "We've come for the girl," Cole said smoothly. "She's a ward of the state. Belongs under care she cannot find out here." Nayeli stepped from behind the barn before Elias could stop her. Her shoulders trembled, but her chin lifted. "I don't belong to you," she said. Her voice wavered, but it carried across the yard like a clear bell. Cole's smile faltered for the first time. "Child, you're confused. You don't know what's best." "I know enough," Nayeli cut in, her voice stronger now. "I know cages when I see them. I won't go back." The deputies shifted uneasily. One unrolled the document. "Says here she's to be returned." Elias stepped forward, planting himself between them and Nayeli. His voice, once buried in silence, rang out clear and firm. "She stays. You'll not take her from this land." Cole's eyes narrowed. "You'd defy the law for her?" Elias met his gaze without flinching. "I'll defy a lie. Whatever you claim, it ends here." The standoff thickened, the prairie wind tugging at coats and hats. For a long, tense moment, no one moved. Then the second deputy cleared his throat. "I've heard talk in town. Folks say she works honestly, sings like the birds, and hasn't harmed a soul. Laws meant to protect, not cage." The first deputy lowered the paper, his resolve wavering. "Maybe this ain't our fight, Reverend." Cole's face darkened, fury breaking through the mask of calm. "You'll regret this," he hissed at Elias. "Both of you." He mounted his gelding with a sharp tug of the reins, then wheeled away, the deputies trailing uncertainly behind. Dust swallowed them as they rode off. Silence returned, heavy but alive. Nayeli exhaled shakily, her hands still trembling. "You stood for me," she whispered. Elias turned to her, his voice steady as stone. "I'll keep standing, so long as it takes." The words bound them tighter than any chain could. Dust Creek might not forgive an Apache girl, nor a rancher who defied powerful men, but in that moment, neither cared. Weeks passed, without another sign of Reverend Cole. Word had spread through Dust Creek how Elias McKenna had stood his ground, how the girl with the clear voice had refused to be silenced. The town, wary at first, began to soften. Neighbors brought seed and flour on the excuse of trade, staying to listen when Nayeli hummed as she worked. What once would have been suspicion turned, little by little, into quiet respect. Life on the ranch settled into a new rhythm. Elias spoke more freely now, the habit of silence broken like ice thawing beneath spring. At first, his words came sparingly, but with each day they grew easier, steadier, as though his voice had simply been waiting for the right reason to return. Nayeli brought laughter with her, and music. She painted the mornings with song, a thread of melody winding through chores, softening the edges of the long days. The cattle grew calmer under her hand, the horses nickered when she approached, and even the chickens seemed livelier for her presence. Elias watched it all with quiet wonder, realizing how deeply his ranch, his life had changed since the night he found her in the hayloft. One late afternoon, as golden light slanted across the valley, Elias repaired the sagging front porch while Nayeli planted wildflowers along the path. Her hair caught the sunlight, her hands stained with earth, and she looked up at him with a smile that carried no trace of fear. "This place is yours too now," Elias said, setting his hammer aside. "If you'll have it." Nayeli's breath caught. For a moment, she only stared at him, her eyes bright with something beyond gratitude. "You mean it?" Elias nodded, his voice low but certain. "I do." The simple words struck deeper than any vow. Her smile widened, soft but sure, and she returned to her planting, humming under her breath. That weekend, the town gathered for a small harvest social. At first, Nayeli hesitated, but Elias urged her gently, standing beside her as they walked into the schoolhouse lit with lanterns. Conversation quieted when she stepped forward, but not with malice, rather, with expectation. When she sang, the room hushed in reverence. Her voice, no longer trembling, filled the hall with warmth and hope. And when Elias, heart pounding, joined her on the final verse, the melody his mother had once sung, there was no mistaking it. The rancher and the Apache girl had built something no man could take away. The house on Dust Creek was no longer silent. It sang. And for Elias and Nayeli, it was only the beginning. If you thought this ending was powerful, just wait until you see the next love story waiting for you.